We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph and Beis Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 31b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing a case where three people are walking one right after the other. The first person stumbles and falls, and the second person falls over the first person, and the third person falls over the second person. And the Gemara says the first person is responsible for any damage that happens to the second person, and the Gemara says that the second person is responsible for the damage that happens to the third person. And Rava says on the previous Amud that when we say the first person is responsible for the damages to the second person, we're talking about the damages that happen from that first person's body or from that first person's property. However, when we're talking about the damages that happen from the second person to the third person, there the second person is responsible for the damages that happen from his body, from the second person's body, but not for the damages that happen from his property. And the Gemara asked me, Manav Shach, if we're considering stumbling to be negligence, so both individuals should be chayiv. And if we're talking about, and if we're understanding that stumbling is not considered to be negligence, but it's considered to be an unavoidable accident, so both should be pater. And the Gemara now explains, Rishon Vadai Poshehu, the first person, he is certainly considered to be negligent, but Sheni, but when it comes to the second person, Agufo Mechayev, so he's responsible for the damage that happens from his body, the Havalo Lamod Velo Amad, because he should have stood up and he did not stand up, but on Mamono Potter, but on the damage that happens from his property, so then we say he's Potter, Diamar Le, because he can say to him, Hai Bira, Lavana Karise, this pit, I was not the one that dug this pit. And Rashi explains, Vachi Perusha, this is the explanation. Rishon Chayev ben Izkei Sheni, the first person is Chayev on the damage that happens to the second person. Bein Shenizik begufo shel Rishon, whether he's damaged by the body of the first person. Ubein Shehuzak b'mamono shel Rishon, or whether he's damaged by the property of the first person. Gufo kedin mazik, the body that's like a regular mazik. V'chayev af al kelim d'sheni, he's going to be chayev even on the property, even on the vessels of the second person, because it's considered to be like adam hamazik. The gufo lo mashvinan le kedin bor, because his body is not considered like a boar. It's considered to be again just straight damage. Umemono havale betoras bor. However, his property, meaning the first person's property, that's considered like a boar. V'chayev al guf beis, and he's going to be chayev on the second person's body. Upater al kela, but he will be pater on the vessels of the second person that get damaged by his own property. Imhuzak mamon b'mamon, if property damages other property, pater, then he's going to be pater. The boar chayev bo nizkei adam, because the boar is chayev if it damages a person. Because we said when we say shor v'lo adam, when we say by boar that you're not chayev on a person, that's only if the person dies in the pit. Avalinin is zaken chayev, but in terms of the person getting damaged, a boar is chayev on a person. However, upater bo esakelim, however, a boar is pater when it comes to vessels, when it comes to kelim. V'sheni, now the second person, chayev ben izkei shlishi kedin mazik. So in terms of the third person, he's chayev on any damage he does to the third person as a mazik, meaning as an adam hamazik. Heichaduhuzak begufo shel sheni, if the damage happens from the body of the second person. Avalo ben izkei mamono, but not if his property damages. Shemamono shel sheni hizak es hashlishi begufo. For example, if the property of the second person damages the third person, even the body of the third person, eino chayev, he's not chayev afilu toras bor ein lo. It's not even considered to be a bor. Al hakaderos shel hasheni lischayev, on the kaderos, on the pots of that second person, it's not going to be chayev as a bor, but masha hizik, and what damage it causes. Ve'afilu hizik begufo shel shlishi, even if it damages the body of the third person, which again normally a bor is chayev on damages to a person, but this is not even going to be at the level of a bor. And we will read the next Rashis as well, even though they're on the previous Amud. Manav Shach, again, the Gemara asked, either way you look at it, Demashvis lemamono shel rishon bor umamono desheni pater, because you're saying that the first person's property is a bor, and the second person's property is going to be totally pater. That doesn't make sense. Iniskal posheo, if we're going to say that stumbling is negligence, v'havikim mashlich takalosa b'Rosh Hashanah, it's as if he actually threw his property in Rosh Hashanah and he created these stumbling blocks. Mishum hachim mamon rishon chayv, and that's why the property, let's say the pots of the first person, he's chayiv on the damage that those do. So sheni nami nechayiv anizkei shlishi. So the second person also is a posheya. His property he should also be chayiv on. Da'avin memono legufo shel shlishi. Anything that his property does to the body of the third person should be a problem. It should be like a bor. V'ila posheya, and if it's not considered to be negligence, the onus mashvisli, you're considering the whole thing, the whole falling to be an onus. Afilo rishon niftar, meaning the first person should be pater. Afilo anizak and hizik begufo. Even the damage that's that's done by his guf, by his body. Kol shekain v'mamono. And certainly the damage that's done by his property, if it's an onus, then he should be totally potter. And so therefore, why do we make this distinction again? And we're saying that the first person, there's a chiyuv from his body, obviously, and also from his property. His property is considered like a bor. But the second person, we say that second person's property, there's no chiyuv whatsoever. Why do we make that distinction? And the Gemara then answered as follows: Rishon vadai poshehu. The first person certainly is considered negligent to be nafshe nafal, because he fell, and that was his own fall. Hilkach gufo have kamazik. Therefore, again, his body is like adam hamazik. Ve'amamono havale korabor, and the property that causes damage, that's like digging a pit. Umechayiv miyah gufo d'sheni, and a pit is going to be chayiv at least on the body of the second person. Again, when it comes to a bor, that's pater on kalim. Because Sava Rava, and Rava holds the Rabbanan lo pligi oled Rabbi Meir beniskal poshehu, that the Rabbanan do not argue on Rabbi Meir in terms of someone who stumbles, and they also agree that someone who stumbles is negligent. Kedeuki le'el Abaye de v'tarti pligi, because Abaye said that there's a machlokus, there's a double machlokus, there's a machlokus on niskal poshe as well. Rava holds no, the Rabbanan don't argue on that. Everybody agrees niskal posheya. According to Rava, the only machlokus is on an ownerless kind of bor. But according to Rava, if somebody stumbles, that's certainly considered negligence according to everybody. So that's in terms of the first person. The first person is certainly considered a posheya, and therefore any damage that happens from his body is adam hamazik, and any damage that happens from his property, that's considered like a bor. But the second person, benifilaso onusu. So when he falls down, that's actually considered to be an onus. Agufo miya mechayev kemazik biyadayim. Now, on his body, he's still chayev, and that's like a regular adam amazik. Shahaya lo lamod v'lo amod, because there we apply the rule that he had time to stand up. He should have stood up, and he did not. But amamono pater lagamri. But on the property, if his property does damage, he's totally pater. V'afilu haya lo lamod, even if he had time to stand up. Diamar le haibira lavana karise, because he can say, I never dug this pit. Ela Rishon was really the first person that dug this pit. Umafgir nizakav la'achar nefilas ones. And if somebody makes ownerless the property that does damage after he falls ba'ones, amr le'el de pater, then we say that he's pater, and that's why he can say, I'm pater on the damage of my property. It's the same thing as a nefilas ones, and I made my property ownerless after I fell ba'ones, and therefore in such a situation he's going to be pater. And the Gemara continues, Meisrei, we have a question from the following Braisa, Kulan chayoven al nizke gufan, they are all chayiv on the damage that happens from their body. Upeturin al nizke mamon, but they're pater from the damage that happens from their property. And so the Gemara asks, my lav is it not? Afilu Rishon, even the first person seems to be pater on the damage that happens from his property. That contradicts what Rava said before. Rava again said that first person is responsible for the damages that happen from his body. That's Adam Hamazik. And the damages that happen from the first person's property is considered a bor, and he's responsible. And the Gemara says, no, that's not what the Brisa means. Levar mi Rishon. The Brisa is talking about all the individuals except the first person. The first person actually is responsible both for Nizke Gufo and Nizke Mamono. But the Gemara says, Vakulam Katani, but what does that mean? The Brisa says all of them certainly includes the first person as well. The Gemara says, Amar Avad Barava says, Kulan Hanizakin. We just mean all of those who were damaged. The first person only caused damage, he wasn't damaged himself, and so we're not talking about him. But the Gemara doesn't like this answer. Hi, what kind of answer is this? If you said that the word kulan means also the first person, that would explain the word kulan. That's all of them, including the first person. But if you're going to say that we're talking about all of them except for the first person, my kulan, so why does it say all of them? Listen, hanizakin, it should say all of those who were damaged. The first person is only causing damage, he wasn't damaged. And so therefore, this brisa is a question on what Rava said. And Rashi explains, Meisvei kulan chayavan al nizke gufan, they're all chayav on the damage that happens from their bodies, shehizik gufan etzachen, meaning their bodies damage others, bein beguf, bein memamon, whether it damages the other people's body or the other people's property, upeturin al nizke mamonin, and they're all pater on the damage that happens from their property, shehizik mamonin etzachen, again, their property damaged others, v'kasal kadai tachashtu, the legamri pater lehu, afilu hizik hamaman eskof chaver. Right now we think that their property, they're totally pater if their property damages, even if it damages the body of the other individual. My lav afilu rishon, and doesn't that mean to say even the first person is the same thing, pater on all damages that happen from his property? Ushmamin on niskala posheo, and according to that we see from this brisa that stumbling is not considered negligence. V'yagufahu demechayev dehavale lamod, the damage that happens from his body that he's chayev on because he should have stood up. V'yafagav detchilaso onus. Now even though the whole falling initially was an onus, it was an accident, chayev, he's still chayev devegufo lo mashvinon leidin bor. bore, because his body's not considered a bore. The name of mafkir nizakav achar nefilas onesu, because then we would consider it like a bore, where it's ownerless property after he fell ba'ones and be potter, but that's not the case. Elamazik mamishu, it's considered to be like adam amazik. The adam lo have a bore, because a person is not considered a bore. Avalamamono potter, but again, on his property, since it fell ba'ones, it's like his ownerless, the property he declared ownerless after it fell ba'ones, that he would be potter on. And again, that seems to be a question on Rava. And so the Gemara continues, Elo amar Rava, rather Rava says, Rishon chayiv bein benizke gufo desheni, bein benizke mamono desheni. What it means is that the first person is chayiv whether he damages the body of the second person or whether he damages the property of the second person. V'sheni chayiv benizke shlishi benizke gufo, and the second person is chayiv on the damage to the third person's body, avalo benizke mamono, but not on the damage to the third person's property. And Rashi explains, Elo amar Rava, rather Rava says, Al karchach Rava lo chayiv harishon benizke mamono. Certainly Rava does not make the first person chayiv on the damage that first person's property does, shehizik b'sheni, that damages the second person. Again, delab poshehu, because we're going to say that it's not negligence when a person stumbles. V'lo chilek bein rishon l'sheni ela b'nizaken shehizik gufo, and the distinction between the first and second person is only within damage that happens from the person's body. V'hachi amar Rava, and this is what Rava is saying, Rishon have a gufo mazik. By the first person, his body is considered a mazik. V'chayev afilu b'nizkei mamono shel sheni, and therefore chayev not only damaging the body of the second person, but also the property of the second person, like any adam amazik, hoel v'hayel olamot, since he should have stood up when he had the opportunity. Avol sheni, but the second person, afilu hayel olamot, even if he had the opportunity to stand up, lo mechayev kuli hay karishon, he's not as chayev as the first person. The rishon have a posheya tvei misheni, because the first person is more negligent than the second. Hilka Rishon vade have a mazik. Therefore, the first person is considered a mazik. V'sheni mistayi mash v'sleila gufe bor. But the second person, it's enough that we consider his body to be a bor. So the person's body, that second person's body, has the status of a bor. V'chayev al nizkei gufo shel shlishi, and therefore he's chayev on the damage to the body of the third person. Avalo b'nizkei mamono, but not to the damage to the property of the third person. To lo matzino bor shechayev or sakelim, because we don't find that bor is ever chayev when it does damage to vessels. Ubraisa de katani kulan chayav, and when the Braisa said they're all chayiv al niske gufo, that means to say on the damage that happens to the person's body. The mashma afilu sheni, that goes even on the second person. Kagon shehizik as gufo shel shlishi, if he damages the body of the third person. So again, they're all chayiv on that. But when it comes to damage to property, so again, only the first person is going to be chayiv to the damage that he does for the damage that he does to the property of the second. But the second person will not be chayiv on the damage he does to the property of the third. And the Gemara continues and explains, my time, and what's the reason that the second person is not chayiv on the damage to the property of the third, to have a bor, because that second person is considered to be like a bor. V'lo matzino bor shechayiv v'esakelim. We don't find that a bor is chayiv when it does damage to vessels. And the Gemara continues, hanicho l'shmuel. Now that works according to Shmuel. Da'amar kol takol borhu, who says that anything that's a stumbling block is considered to be a bor. The second person can be considered to be a bor. Ela l'Rav da'amar yafkrei in ilo lo. But according to Rav, who says that it's only when you declare the item ownerless that it's considered to be a bor, otherwise it's not considered to be a bor. So how can you consider the second person to be a bor? Ma'ikol meimar. What are we going to say according to Rav? And Rashi explains, Hanichel Shmuel ikol memar degufo shel sheni islay Torah bor. It makes sense according to Shmuel, the body of the second person can have the status of a bor. El Rav do amari lo afkrei lo have a bor. But according to Rav, who says that if it's not made ownerless, it's not a bor. B'shloma mamon ikol memar de mafkir. You could say that property is made ownerless. El guf mi mafkir. A person can't be mafkir his own guf, and therefore again it cannot have the status of a bor according to Rav. And so the Gemara answers, Liolam Kedamar Meikara, really we should go back to what we said originally. In other words, we make a distinction between the first and second person, that the first person is considered to be an Adam Hamazik, and his property is considered to be a bor, and the second person is considered to be an Adam Hamazik, but his property is totally potter. With the Kasha Loch Kulan Chayav, and your Kasha was from the Braisa that said Kulan Chayav, and it seemed to make no distinction between the first and second person. It seemed to say that the first person and the second person are both Chayav on damage that happens from their body, but not on damage that happens from their property. So for that we can understand that Braisa as follows. Tirgamar Ravada Bar Menyume Kame de Ravina. Ravada Bar Menyume explained it in front of Ravina. Shahuzku Kalim Bekalim. That's talking about when property damages other property. And Rashi explains, Tirgama Rav Ada bar Menyume, Rav Ada bar Menyume explains, Livraisa Delael, the way we explained the earlier Braisa, could go in Shehuzku Kalim Bekalim. We're talking about when property damages other property. Uliola Milse Derava Kedahava Shaminan Le Meikar. What Rava said, we're going to understand it the way we understood it originally. The Gufo, the Rishon Vesheni, Havikim Azikin Biodayim. The bodies of the first and second person are considered like Adam Amazik. V'chayav and Allah calls Chayav and everything. V'afilu L'Shmuel, and even according to Shmuel, Damar Demidi de Lo Afkre Have a Bor, who says that something that is not ownerless is considered a bor. Hani mili b'mammon, that's only true by property. Aval begufo adam hu. But again, if the person's body damages, that's considered adam amazik. V'lo bor, it's not considered bor. V'chayev on this kekelim is going to be chayev on everything, even damage that happens to property. Umemono shall rishon l'shmuel. Now the property of the first person, according to Shmuel, bein afkre, bein lo afkre, have a bor. Doesn't matter if it's ownerless or not; it's considered a bor. Ularav, and according to Rav, lo afkre chayev bakol. If it's not ownerless, it's chayev in everything. V'afkre have a bor, and if the person made it ownerless, it's considered a bor. The niskal me'atzmo poshehu. The point is, the person who stumbled is considered negligent, and therefore the property can be considered a bor. Umemono shel sheni pater afal niske gof ashlishi, and the property of the second person is totally pater, even if it damages the body of the third person. The nezek hamufkar al yedei onesu, because again, as we said above, it's considered damage of something that was made ownerless after it fell ba'ones, by accident, and therefore is not going to be chayiv. Inami lo afkre shoruhu v'tapach biape sharei onesu, and even if he didn't make it ownerless, so it's going to be considered to be like a shore, but it's going to be considered a situation of onus, and again, is going to be totally pater. Umilse derava mesukma bein l'Rav bein l'Shmuel, and Rashi here is pointing out that what Rava says can work whether you're following Rav or whether you're following Shmuel. Now you had a difficulty from the Braisa. Because the Braisa seems to say that even the first person's property is pater, is not considered to be a bor. What that Braisa just means is that if the property of the second person is damaged by the property, by the vessels of the first, so then there's a p'tur, because bor is pater on kalim. The mifter mishum de bor ninu v'lo chayiv bo es kalim. It's pater because it's considered a bor, and bor is not chayiv on kalim. Rav badaf grinu, again you're going to have to say according to Rav it's considered a bor because it was made ownerless. Shmuel afilu lo af grinu, according to Shmuel it's considered a bor even if it's not ownerless. V'hachi katani, and this is the way that we read the Braisa. Kulan chayavan al nizke shemazik gufo. Everybody is chayiv on damage done by their body. V'afilu hizik kalim, and even if their body damages vessels, to gufo da adam maziku, because again the person's body is considered adam mazik. Upeturin al nizke memonon, but they're pater on the damage that's done from their property. Im hizik memonon as klei chaverin. If their property damages other property, because even the property of the first person is not more than a bor, and if it's only a bor, it's pater on kalim. Because there's nobody who's more negligent than somebody who digs a pit. And we say still such a situation of bor is pater on kalim. Aval hizik memono es haguf. But if the person's property would damage the other person's body, so that bor could be chayiv if it's considered a bor. Yesh me'an chayiv, yesh me'an pater. In some cases chayiv, in some pater. Rishon chayiv, the first person will be chayiv because he again is niskal posheya. It's considered a bor. V'sheni pater, but the second person is pater because his falling is considered an ones, and therefore it's not considered an issue of bor. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, this is again from the previous Amud, Im machmas rishon naflu, it said that if they all fall because of the first person, so then rishon chayiv ben izkei kulam, the first person is chayiv in the damages that happen to all of them. And the Gemara asks, machmas rishon hechi nafal, how could it be that they all fall because of the first person? Rav Papa says, de paskal le'orche keshalda, that he's across the entire road like a skeleton, and therefore they all fall over the first person. Rav Zvid says, kechutra de samyusa, it's diagonally like the cane of a blind person. Again, the same basic idea. They all fall over the first person. And Tosas explained, Kechutra de Samyus, again like the cane of the blind. Rav Papa Polik, this actually is arguing, Rav Zvid is arguing Rav Papa. Usvir leil Rav Zvid, dechi paskal orcha keshalder. Rav Zvid holds that if the person is like a skeleton across the whole road, lo hayarichon chayv ben izkei shlishi, that first person shouldn't be chayv in the damage to the third. Shayolo lizar, kishara hasheni shenafel, he should have been careful when he saw the second person fall. Aval bechutra de Samyusa dehave balachson, but when you're talking about the cane of the blind, which we're saying is diagonal, kisheniskal harishon barosh hachutra, oso sheba'achar kach v'niskal besofa chutra lo ra'o. So when somebody trips over one part of that cane, so the other person is not able to see because it's diagonally, and that's why that first person is responsible for everything in that situation. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Zeba bechaviso v'zeba bekoraso. If this person is walking with his barrel and the other person is walking with his beam, Nishbara kado shel zeh bekoraso shel zeh, and this person's barrel breaks by the beam of the other person, pater, so he's pater. Shel hazeh rishos lahalich v'lazeh rishos lahalich, because this one had permission to walk there, and the other one had permission to walk there. No one was doing anything wrong. Haya balakora rishon, let's say the person with the beam is walking in the front, ubal chavis achron, and the person with the barrel is walking behind him. Nishbara chavis bekora, if the barrel breaks by the beam, pater balakora, the person who is carrying the beam is pater, because again it's the other person who is walking too fast behind him, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph.